Yes, the mics are on and back. I was wondering if I had been silenced. Yes, you see, at the end of the day, when we wrap a whole session of panel discussions, I'm pleased to invite the speakers of the last session right now. The topic being G20 Collaborative Innovations for Sustainable Development. And for which I invite the speakers, Ms. Caitlin Ciarle, Councillor, Science and Technology, Australia. Let's welcome her onto the stage with our best of our energies. Mr. Mohammad A. Alarifai, I hope I got your pronunciation right. Apologies if I haven't. General Manager of Startup Enablement, Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, Saudi Arabia. Mr. Bonifacius Wahyu Pudianto, Director of Informatics Empowerment, Indonesia. And the panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Parvez Alam. We welcome you, Mr. Alam, Executive Director of CIIC and AIC. Mr. Alam is a well-recognized professional in entrepreneurship ecosystem and is instrumental in setting up the most progressive Startup Incubation Center in Tamil Nadu, which happens to be, of course, our neighbor. It's over to the moderator.
Thank you, MC, for the introduction. And then it's my privilege to moderate this session with two eminent personalities coming from Australia and Saudi Arabia. So Kathleen comes from Australian High Commission from New Delhi, and she's the counselor responsible for science and technology. And Mr. Muhammad Al Arifi, head of digital empowerment in entrepreneurial enterprises from Saudi Arabia. So in the interest of time, we will very quickly grasp the key insights about that, how the G20 collaborative innovations we can do in the area of sustainable development. So as you know that SDG is the very buzzword, and ESG, whether it is corporate or whether it is startups, everywhere we are talking about compliance of SDG goals, and it is no longer a voluntary. It become a more mandatory, right? Earlier, people used to call themselves as a compliance as a more of voluntary. So how do you look at, maybe I'll start with, Mr. Mohammed. So how do you see that Saudi, now we could keep hearing a lot of news coming up with the NEOM city, sustainable development, and I'm sure, you are wanted to go ahead than UAE in terms of the startups, and you're doing a lot of events like LEAP and so on. So can you just a bit explain that how, you are considering these innovations will lead to a sustainable development, and how a country like India can collaborate and then take things forward along with Saudi?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. So to answer this question, I want to shed light on what's now happening in Saudi Arabia. So 7 years ago, Saudi announced the Vision 2030. And that is with very, very ambitious goals where we want to reach by 2030. The way this vision was designed, first of all, it brought everyone, private sector and government sector, under one roadmap. We have one North Star for everything that we do. This is where we're going to get, and this is how we're going to get there. This drives significant demand and also creates a lot of opportunities for whether private sector locally, new startups to fill any gap that is there, or international startups. Just to shed light on what part of the vision, you mentioned NEOM. So NEOM is, I was listening to a documentary not long ago about NEOM, talking about how it was created. everything they bring, they got all the consulting companies, all the best of the best in the world. Whenever there is a benchmark, this is not acceptable. Because what we want to do is something in the future. So here is huge room for innovation. So they got everyone outside the box, multiple workshops. Let's do something that was never done before. Let's try something that was never tried before. If we do something that is slightly better than a similar city elsewhere in the world, that's not acceptable. So, and that's why we had the octagon, we had the line, we had the different, very, very innovative, very ambitious projects that are now being delivered. They're under construction and will be moving people in the coming few years. So what does that, I'm mainly focusing on startups and the entrepreneurship. What does this mean to me? There are many opportunities that, or many objectives that cannot be achieved without startups helping them. So if we're talking about logistics, so what we want to do is logistics that was not done before. We cannot do the conventional way of providing the supply chain, etc. So that created a lot of opportunity for up-and-coming startups, and also a lot of collaboration, because we cannot, if we want to go far, we have to go together. So it has, we have to have collaboration with the East and the West, where like startups that are in advanced stage, they can come and help us build this ecosystem and access the opportunities that this vision creates.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting. I think you highlighted the role of innovation and startups in creating a sustainable, development, like especially in the city, what you are creating, like a completely a future which never, duplicate any of the earlier experiments, is really an eye-opening, and it creates a lot of opportunities. Now, coming back to Ms. Kathleen, like, what I perceive is that Australia wanted to position as an R&D country, right? You want to be a brain. You don't want to have a more manufacturing. You don't want to be like India, where we work on the GDP on the manufacturing or labor and things like that. You want to work always on the state of our technologies and advanced technologies and so on. So having said that, do you see a potential collaboration between R&D technology from Australia, collaborating with, the manufacturing industries in India who can do the transfer of technologies? And how do you see that technology is evolving in the area of sustainable development? And what is the contribution from the Australian science part? I think you since you've been the think tank and policy making, right? You're involved in the policy making. So what do you feel that how it's evolving?
Hello, g'day everyone and namaskar. Caitlin here from the Australian High Commission in New Delhi. And I should say up front, I've actually only been in this position for just over 3 months. So I'm still very much learning. I guess there's a couple of things in that question. If I can take a step back, yes, Australia is very proud of its research expertise. And we've seen that. I guess I have the privilege of talking to scientists and researchers every day, and don't quote me on the numbers, I should know this, but for a country that represents, I think 0.03% of the global population, we're responsible for about 4% of scientific publications, the output. So we well and truly punch above our weight. We're, the country where our national science organisation that does industrial research, we're the first inventors of Wi-Fi. So when you go home to your hotel or home tonight and your phone picks up some emails or text messages, you can thank Australia. We've got some, obviously, expertise in other areas. We're a leading sort of resources extractor and mineral, resources technologies, health sciences across the board, which we're really proud of. But we're also very much, all that being said, we very much rely on international collaboration. This is another stat I'm making up, but it's something like 40% of those scientific publications are co-published with an international author. And India is actually our 7th largest sort of co-publisher. All of those things, all of those developments come on the back of international collaboration, so it's hugely important, and we want to see that continue. And in terms of here in India and where it goes next, I think sometimes, to a certain extent, yes, the easy answer is yes, we would love to develop the know-how and the technology in Australia and leverage India's manufacturing output. That's a very simple one. Of course, we'd love to do that. But it's a little simplistic too. We want to do more. India is super smart, and as I said, we do these amazing co-publications. From the Australian government's perspective, our bilateral programs are about leveraging the strengths of both countries. So I happen to have, for example, space collaboration in my remit as well. And we're, sponsoring a program for Australian and Indian space startups to collaborate and co-produce something and test something. And the recipients of the first award of those will be announced in the next few months. We have a 16-year-old bilateral research fund, which is Australia's oldest government-to-government research fund. That's with India. And every year we're funding 4 or 5 research projects in areas of shared interest, because Australia and India both have to deal with drought, and both have to deal with tropical diseases, and both have to deal with climate and extraction of resources and all those sorts of things. And so that's not, that's both parties coming to the table and lending that brain power. That's exchange of researchers and secondments and joint PhD programs that are hugely successful. It'll be in an Australian university that is the first foreign university to open a campus in India. We're very, very proud of that. Indian students in Australia make up our biggest proportion of international students. We're very, very proud of that. We've got this living bridge between the two countries. The other thing I would add is, yes, we would sort of definitely leverage India's manufacturing capability. The Australian government in the last few years, coming out of COVID and some of the other issues in geopolitics, we're also looking at how do we maybe bring home some of that advanced manufacturing capability? How do we contribute to other parts of the global supply chain? So in resources, for example, we're looking at, and we don't know the answers yet, but let's ask the question, can we do a little bit more value adding in our resources in Australia? So the Australian government's just at the moment setting up what we're calling the National Reconstruction Fund. That's a $15 billion Australian dollar investment in that advanced manufacturing capability in key sectors where we think we can contribute to really critical global supply chains. I actually once, for a panel a few weeks ago, tried to convert 15 billion Australian dollars into rupees and then try and work out the lac and crawl. I gave up, but it's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it's very great insight to hear. In fact, I was involved with this India-Australia Strategic Fund, bilateral fund, which funds many research projects coming out from India and Australia. It really motivates the bilateral collaboration between the two countries, especially on the academic and R&D environment. So I'll come back to you after Mohammed. So Mohammed, you have mentioned that Saudi is looking for creating a future, right? And that too, you have a very competing neighbors who are already also thinking about future. I recently saw a future museum in Dubai. So having said that, now Saudi has an inclusive ecosystem. Like you say that now you have Saudi has been very bullish about startups and things like that. Do you have a venture capital ecosystem, or Saudi is coming out with any sovereign fund, right? Wealth fund, which will give a more impetus to these kind of innovations, especially on the the sustainable and other areas. So, what do what's your insight on this?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Parvez. So I will go back like 5 years ago. How was the startup ecosystem? how was it structured in Saudi, and how is it now? So maybe 5 years ago, the total investment, VC activities, was less than $50 million. So it was non-existent. So very few startups, very few VCs. And then with the vision being activated, where the SME authority was established, the objectives became very clear, the established a couple of VC funds, government VC funds that act as LP and some of the private funds, did a couple of programs to incentivize investment, co-matching, etc. PIF had a lot of focus on VC activities. Sanabil was established, as well as a lot of accelerator programs started being active. So last year, the total investment was $1 billion. The year before was $570 million. Last year, globally, there was a decline of 35% in VC activities. Saudi was increased by 75%. So it's not, the year before our increase was 270%, from 150 to $575 million. However, $1 billion of VC activities for a G20 country, an economy like Saudi Arabia, just tells us that this ecosystem is yet to be seen. It's being created. The latest round is Series C. And some of the Series C that was raised this year, startups that were created a year and a half ago. So because there is a lot of demand, and startups are trying to fill this demand. We had a couple of VCs. Aramco became Saudi Aramco, which is the largest oil company, became extremely active in the startup ecosystem. They established, I think, 3 programs. Prosperity 7, which is $1 billion fund that invests in US and China, or in the East and the West, but they're headquartered in US and China. They have Wa'id, which is the entrepreneurship fund that started actively investing outside Saudi. They have, Sanabil has invested, they have released the funds that they've invested in. The top funds globally, they act as LP in them, whether in Silicon Valley, in India, in China, in Europe. And this is all like development money. It's investment with return on investment, but however, it eases the connection between the different countries. Currently, you cannot say the borders are being fading. So NEOM actually sits in Saudi, and it's interconnecting with Egypt and with Jordan. The world is becoming global. A lot of the startups and in Egypt or in our neighbors in UAE, in Kuwait, in Qatar, cannot base their startup on one market. They all work in Saudi, they all work in Dubai, they all work in Abu Dhabi. I think if we look at it, if we zoom out, actually the Saudi market is not the Saudi market, it's the MENA market. 400 million population, have very similar culture, very similar customer way of thinking. So whatever works, and not only MENA and extend to East Asia and Mid Asia, where the buying, the customer like ingredients is the same, whether it's B2B or B2C. So I think, whatever is happening in Saudi with the NEOM, with the city of the future, etc., is a regional thing. It's a global thing, but it starts with the region.
Yeah, I think as you rightly said, Saudi is and a hub for opening avenue for MENA market as such, and then you have the large geographical advantage, largest region in the MENA, right, in the geography wise. So you have that advantage, and as well as this competitive edge. So coming to Kathleen, like you mentioned about that, as you know, there's a very smallest population but largest number of scientific publications, and India, Australia has very good academic collaboration. As you know, large number of students from India goes to Australia for higher education and so on. So how do you see that this, that academic collaboration leads to a more of R&D joint collaboration? You mentioned about this India-Australia, strategic fund, bilateral fund to boost the innovation and creativity. But how do you see that this will also help among the G20 nations, especially India, Australia, to collaborate on sharing this technology? Do you see that any value proposition for startups in this to get involved and acquire technologies? You mentioned that Australia wanted to focus more on the advanced manufacturing. Yeah, maybe, yeah. Do you see that this academic collaboration leads to R&D, which leads to products and which may lead to startups? How do you see this chain works?
I wish it was that simple. I wish we could say this leads to, I can't lie, Australia, like many countries, there's the valley of death, right? It's how do we get our amazing research, how do we translate that, how do we get it funded, how do we get startups to become scale-ups, to become firms?
Where do you see Australia would like to add their value more?
I think we need to, and this is part of the sort of, I think it's well understood. I think we know, all of us, that there are improvements that we can make to support our startup ecosystem, to support linkages, to better plug, I guess, Australian ideas and startups into international markets. How do you make those connections? And Australia's got great industry. We've got a really entrepreneurial spirit. We've got 5 firms here that have come to India off their own back. So I'm really, really proud of our industry, but of course we can do more. And I guess I'm a bureaucrat. I have to speak from a government perspective. We know there's that gap. We know that we can fund, we're a huge funder of research infrastructure and basic research in Australia and overseas, but we know that doesn't translate as simply as that chain. So we know there's things to fix. So, I mean, by way of example, we're very much supporting efforts to try and plug Australian firms and ideas into global markets like India's. I'm from, as I said, the policy side of the Australian government. We have 5 offices here in India, which is as many as anywhere else in the world. And for every office where we have policy sort of high-level people up here, we have our Austrade, Australian Trade and Connection office with us in all 5 of those offices. These are business people who understand the pressures facing Australian industry, who understands the weaknesses and things that we can, the opportunities here in country. So they're on the ground working with Australian firms, building connections. We've got the Australian Trade Commission run a program out of Bengaluru supporting Australian companies to take those steps and feel more confident entering new markets like India. So we have a range of programs like that to try and plug that gap. We're also sort of targeting where we can key industries. And I guess this is a good example, coming back to that sort of sustainability goals. Our National Science Agency has got 50 years of history collaborating with Indian organisations. This is the CSIRO, and they have an MOU here in India with the CSIR, sort of their industrial research equivalent. Prime Ministers Modi and Albanese jointly announced a program back in March when Prime Minister Albanese was here in Australia. In a couple of months' time, we'll open round 1 of applications for a sort of a jointly funded, joint Australia-India. It's an 8-month program for startups in both countries to support them to, test their products, enter the other country, get some real sort of mentoring and support. So we're really trying to target areas like now. The focus area of that program is circular economy initiatives, because we know that there's the swathe of programs, circular economy, one of them, ending plastic waste, food waste, sustainability. That's a problem shared by every country. and it doesn't have a border, and it doesn't have passports, and they're things that we can, as I said, leverage each other's strengths, come to combined solutions, tap into each other's access to capital and markets and demand and testing and expertise, and try and get some products out there that can support global sustainability objectives. And I can't talk too much about the G20 in particular, but only to say that it's a great sort of forum to have all of these nations in the one room talking about the issues we all have, the shared problems, and I absolutely think there's value in that. And for every discussion in a G20 discussion where it's public servants like me, there's been a side event where it's industry from every country, and that's been really useful as well. I'd also like to just, I guess, take the opportunity to thank India and the government here for, showcasing using this experience, the digital economy and, how digital technologies can support those sustainability development goals. I also had the privilege of attending one day of the Startup 20 Shikar in Delhi in early July. And for those that don't know that under India's G20 presidency, the Indian government established a brand new G20 engagement group called Startup 20. And that was a wonderful event. The same thing, getting startups from every country in the room, but also in addition to sort of talking about how do we streamline, access to capital and things, there's a really wonderful discussion or a side working group around inclusiveness and how do our countries approach supporting female founders or founders from diverse backgrounds. And I think that was a really important conversation that I really just wanted to acknowledge as well.
Yeah, I think thanks for giving heads up. I think you spelled out a lot of programs. The Australian government is keen to work with India, especially on the circular economy and other programs which you mentioned about it. And maybe as a concluding remarks, what I felt is that I like the word what you said. You like both the East and the West. The collaboration. I think that's the theme of the G20. All the G20 countries should come together. And as you see from the MeitY has coined one of the theme today as a circular economy also. Like some startups I was just sitting in the jury session, I could see that many startups coming from the circular economy side and pitching, their things. I think we should thank MeitY for choosing this as one of the important highlighted thematic area. So having said that, on the circular economy and the sustainability, like for example, now there are ESGs policies have come up, these environmental, social and governance, and especially on the West, they are very keen, big corporates are following ESG, standards. And right now the standards like GRI and their compliance to, the corporates are coming up with compliance to these standards voluntarily. And now government is forcing them to follow on and so on. So maybe as a concluding remark, from your government, since you represent a government, from government side, what is the focus and impetus they are giving on this, SDG, ESG, and things to get, implemented? Maybe a few lines from both of you so that we can conclude. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Regarding the different collaboration with the G20 members, I'll just give what we're doing in this regard and how the whole global economy is becoming one big economy, led by, I think, the largest economies. So we recently created this year where we grouped the high potential, the high scalers, startups and launched the Saudi Unicorn program, where we're identifying the potential unicorns and put targets on ourselves and how we can get there. And through this program, we already started working with MeitY, with Next Icon in Indonesia, with the French Tech, with the different G20 counterparts, where they're supporting startup ecosystems, where it's a mutual collaboration, where we help them access the MENA market. They help us learn and access talent and access startups in their regions. And I think now with the new generation coming, I think the way the startup founders are focused, what makes huge value to them is very, very earth friendly, has to be in line with the ESGs and with the sustainability goals, with the carbon emission, the different environmentally friendly way of doing future things. So I think, and that's fully in line with the new projects. So NEOM and the Octagon, which is one of the largest industrial complexes or cities that is green. We established the Saudi Green Initiative, which is mainly focusing on enhancing sustainability and making the world a better place. And that all gives opportunity to entrepreneurs and to startups to make it happen. Because we cannot rely on the conventional way of doing things that will take very long to achieve our goals.
Thanks, Mohammed. Yeah, Kathleen, you're...
Just to agree, I think if you ask an Australian business person who's here how they find navigating some of those things, they'll give you a very blunt answer. I'm very conscious I'm not a business owner. I can't say. Australia has the highest of regulatory standards. I meet enough businesses to know sometimes a lot of the time that's annoying, to say it nicely. That's not what they say to me. But I also think we also have the highest and the most sort of innovative companies as well. And I guess that's part of, and we have companies that are very responsible. And while we have regulatory standards for some things, we have companies that absolutely see that this is our contribution to the world and we have to be competitive, and customers' demands are changing, which is a really good thing as well. People are willing to pay a little bit more to do something better. So I think that's a sort of a natural progression. I would think, just to conclude as well, I guess I don't mean to sound glib about it, but that's the beauty of innovation, isn't it? We've got companies that are trying to solve a problem in a smart way that's competitive, that works, that does it before the other guy. For example, was at a space thing the other day, and there's a firm in Australia that's looking at how to use scrap steel to make space objects and to input into satellites as part of that sort of circle of life, circular economy of the space economy, noting that the number of satellites in space are going up exponentially. That was them trying to be on the forefront of things. There's no direction yet, as far as I know, around use of recycled products in satellites. Even that's a bit far-fetched for Australia for the time being. But in my experience, companies have always moved first in a really good way.
Yeah, I think, I'm very glad to see a bureaucrat empathize more about the business community. I think you have been very blunt in, how these policies should help. And I think in the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, please put up big hands together to Mr. Mohammed and Ms. Kathleen for sharing their insights. We learned a lot about the policy implications and new insights from Saudi Arabia and Australia. Unless audience have any questions, I think we can wind up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, in fact, to the speakers, to the moderator. I request you to stay back for a moment. May I request Mr. Suryakant, if you're here in the audience, to please step up and give tokens of appreciation to the speakers. I could request the moderator. Okay. Also, Mr. Parvez Alam, thank you so much for moderating this discussion and making sure that the audience derives value from all the takeaways, all the insights that you shared. Thank you once again. May we hear a round of applause for all our special guests. Ms. Caitlin Siale, Councillor, Science and Technology, Australia. May we have a memento for her. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel on the G20 Collaborative Innovations for Sustainable Development In case this memento has come, then I would like to invite for Mr. Muhammad A. Alarifai. Thank you for your patience, Caitlin, and of course the understanding. I hope you get to see a lot of Bangalore. Have you visited the place? Ah, that's a place. I know there were a lot of people in the startup pitch sections. I myself sneaked away a little bit to hear some of those exciting innovations. That also explains why some of them had to be there. So to Ms. Caitlin Ciarle, Councillor. She's from the Australia Council. Also, if I can request Mr. Surikant to give to Mr. Muhammad A. Alarifai, General Manager of Startup Enablement, Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, MCIT, Saudi Arabia. Mr. Parvez Alam, who we had earlier introduced, is one of the most progressive startup incubation center in Tamil Nadu. Ladies and gentlemen, could we have a special memento of appreciation for the role he played? Thank you indeed. So that is a wrap. Maybe there can be a picture with all the panelists as well as Mr. Surikant. Meanwhile, as we wrap up day one, I hope that you have met many people, looked at exhibits in the exhibition, been part of the startup pitches, and made new contacts for yourself. There's also going to be a networking dinner, I'm told. But for me, it's time for me to sign off from the first day of the Digital Innovation for World Economies, this DIA Summit. It's time for me, Vasanthi Hariprakash, to sign off. Thank you for being here in this room as part of this program. Namaskara. Namaste.